Hello, my name is Lacey Peterson, and Ed Power asked me to share some examples of ways that I utilize the tool EdHub to be able to help me reach student achievement gains within my classroom. So, I'm a classroom teacher as well. I use EdHub in my classroom, I have for several years, and I'm going to show you some of the tools or reports that I use to be able to identify areas of student need, how I document that, and I'll start by sharing with some screenshots, and then I'll actually take you into a demo site that they've provided to where I can show you how to navigate that in the EdHub software. So let's start by taking a look at one of the first reports that I ever go to at the very beginning of the school year when I get my caseload. I go to our RTI tab in EdHub, and it's called the Plans, Interventions, Progress Monitor Summary Report. And this report is generated by a class list, and it shows all of the educational support that took place for a student in the previous year. So even before students enter my classroom, I already have an idea of what type of support or plan documentation or progress monitors have been noted. So I can go in and see which ones were successful and which ones worked well. And then as I document plans or interventions or progress monitors, it will start to populate in this current year section. So to me as a classroom teacher, this is the very first place I want to look because I want to be able to get a good scope of which students may need support in my classroom, and what some of that intervention documentation looked like. Each student will have their own e-file, and one of the tabs within the e-file is called the Performance tab, and that houses all of the historical assessment performance for that student. The next tab we'll look at will be the educational support, but once I've looked at that RTI report, then I maybe want to go in and look at some individual assessment performance for my students. And I can see the trends of performance for an individual student, and this is really just drilling down individually. The educational support tab of their e-file houses all of their plans. So often as educators, we have a really good idea and scope of what's happening for students in our current year, but I really value being able to reflect on what worked well and maybe what was not as successful the previous year in making my plan for that student intervention while they're in my class. One of the reports that I also use is the assessment reports. So EdHub has the ability to upload any type of state or district assessments. My district uses state assessments as well as some district required ones, and all of those assessments can be housed in this one central location. So I'm not needing to log into multiple different platforms to take a look at that. I can also identify which students are at risk for meeting the benchmarks or which students are significantly above benchmark. I work in a school where a lot of the enrichment opportunities are provided within our individual classroom. And so a lot of times those students at risk are those that are in this above standard category. When I'm viewing the assessment information, I can click to sort each one of these categories. So the default is to put them by last name, but if I click within each achievement level or goal strand area here, it will group the data into those columns. And at a quick glance, I can identify which students would possibly benefit from some intervention. So we'll take a look looking through some of these screenshots, and then I'll actually take you into the platform and show you how I utilize it that way as well. Once I've looked at the data, the next thing I do for those students who I've identified at risk is I document the intervention. And that's really the what am I doing? You know, we have students that have met the achievement or are not meeting that benchmark proficiency. What do I need to do? And EdHub has this intervention template that really guides you in documenting the critical intervention information. So I can identify the skill deficit, the baseline data, the goal and time frame, the teaching strategy and how often, who they work with, how long is the intervention, and then what is the assessment frequency and where is that documented. And so all of that can be noted as far as this is what I'm doing. I put my start date on there and then I put an end date when I actually closed it out. But when I set up the intervention, I just put my start date there. You can print it, you can download it or email it that way. So this is an actual intervention that I performed for a group of students in my classroom. This is my favorite part of EdHub, and it's the progress monitoring tool. And for me, I consider it like the pulse of the intervention. Is it working? What changes do I need to make? So at the beginning of the year, I had a student that came in reading 28 words a minute. And the goal that I set for that student was to be around 80 words a minute, but which was not at grade level. But considering where we had been in education in the last couple years, I was really just trying to close the gap so that then next year we had less of a significant gap to try to get through there. The progress monitoring graph, when you put in the initial score and the goal, it will then leave the goal line registered there on the graph. And then in red, it shows the trend line. As you hover over each one of these probe data points and measures, it will let you know how far you are on that specific day. It gives you an interval goal every single day. So I could see that there for a while, my student was really starting to struggle, and we'd had some change in intervention, and I can document that by placing this vertical line on the graph which noted when I placed a change in intervention. So some of the content was changed for this student, and then hopefully we'll see a change in that trajectory. Sometimes we have to administer one or two more changes, but it's really helpful to be able to indicate those vertical lines for when that change of intervention took place. One of the final pieces in EdHub for the plans as well as the intervention or progress monitor is the outcome reflection. What gains were made? Maybe what are some of the next steps? What do we need to do? So once I reviewed the assessment data, I documented the intervention, and then I was really intentional with my progress monitoring and being mindful of when I needed to change an intervention. We all know as educators, we can get passionate about our interventions we set up because they're good ones. They have good content, they have good instructors, but they don't always work for all students. And so this year, I really tried to be intentional with my progress monitoring and document that. And at the end of the intervention or a plan, within the EdHub tool, you have the ability to go and reflect and give a recommendation as to what would happen next. So as the student enters next year's classroom, the teacher can be able to see that, okay, there was lots of gains that were made here, significant gains, but my recommendation is that the student still continues the plan. They met their targets, but they made great gains. Let's pick up the plan this next year. But they could see here with my notation where we started in the fall, where we started in the spring. This student went from the 27th percentile up to the 78th percentile on one of our state benchmark performances. And then the intervention or accommodation also has an outcome field where I close it, I document whether it was successful or not. It will calculate the intended hours, doesn't calculate attendance and that kind of stuff, but this is really helpful. I know our district administration uses this for some of our state reporting. And then I can put what the growth is. So it really gives you a full capture of what happened for that student within the full scope of their intervention. And now I'm going to take you into the actual product, and let's take a look at where we find that. So I'm in a demo site, and let's take a look at the RTI tab, which is where we will find that programs, plans, interventions. So I just click on the RTI tab right here from the home page. I click on that report, and then I bring up everything is generated from a class list. So I bring up my class list here. And then I can go ahead and see over here is my previous year. Here is my current year. So as I start to document that, then it will keep track of what interventions or plans were noted there. If it's identified as being linked there with the black, then that means that the plan has been closed as I hover over it. But if it is green, then that means that the plan is open and there's some notes. So this report is super helpful. The other tab that I use most often is the Reports tab. The Reports tab is where I'm going to find all of my state or district assessment. As I mentioned to you, we use our state assessments as well as some of our district assessments that we have. And EdHub has the ability to be able to upload, your district can upload those assessments. So it's all in that one central location. And then historically, that information is housed there. So I can click on the state assessment that I want to be able to view. I can then, within each one of these columns, if I click, it'll bring up a little icon that says click here to sort. So it will be able to sort it for me. I can also scroll down to the bottom to be able to see some averages. So as a class, if I want to be able to teach to some strengths within my class, if I want to see an area of improvement, maybe listening was an area that we needed to improve on that particular assessment. But once these data scores are uploaded in here, then as an educator, I have everything in that one central location. For the documentation of the ed support, there's multiple ways to be able to do that. I can go in individually by getting into the student e-file, and I'll just take you into one student's e-file to give you an idea of what that looks like. So these are the tabs that we discussed. The performance tab lets me go and be able to see exactly what's happening individually for that student historically. I can view recent or all results and I can print them. So sometimes I'll go in and take a look at, once I've really drilled down to a specific population of students, take a look to see what were maybe some of their trends for their testing performance. And then really the bulk of it is the educational support. For me, that's what helped me achieve a lot of my reading goals that I had for my class. For myself personally, I had a professional learning plan that I had to complete, and my students making student achievement was my goal that I set with my administrator. And I was pleased to say that when I reflected at the end of the year, my students went from around 45% proficient at the beginning of the year to 83% proficient on their state assessment by the end of the year. And I credit so much of that to being able to take a look at all of my assessment data here in EdHub and then really be intentional and personally accountable for documenting the interventions and following through with the progress monitoring tool. For me, that's just what makes everything connect together, and for myself to know exactly what's working well and what's not necessarily working well for my student. And so when I can make a change of that intervention, there's so many tools that EdHub provides. And as an educator, I'm grateful that my district provides the tool for me because it helps me meet that individual student achievement. And I thank you for joining me today.